grateful, actually, there was a good coffee break because Rory's a really hard act to follow. In fact, I was joking earlier saying if we had an X factor for presenters in the marketing world, I think Rory would get my vote and probably win, to be perfectly honest. The other reason I'm really glad there was a bit of a coffee break is because he mentioned that fact about the instinct to look stupid. And as he's just sort of dissed data, and I'm up here to talk about data, I was feeling slightly anxious. Anyway, thanks to Rory. It was a fantastic presentation. I do love what he says. I absolutely love it. But, you know, my job in data is to be quite factual about things and quite evidence-based. So to introduce myself, I'm Caroline, and I'm from Wonderman and the Knowledge-Based Marketing Group. So we do a little bit of left side, right side brain and pull the things together and do some good work for clients. And I'm here to talk to you today about what digital disruption means to our clients and how we're responding to it. Basically, our response is to try and interpret, understand and learn what is happening online so that we can optimize and maximize a consumer journey. Helping clients have a better and more productive online experience is absolutely in everyone's interest, and I think that's just an area that's going to grow and grow with time. We see this as a massive area of growth and an opportunity for brands to differentiate using data to inform and to drive the process, as well as, I said, understand the detail of the consumer behavior. So just to kick off, I'm going to talk about a consumer journey. Now, I know they're not linear, but we all understand that consumer journeys are wide and varied, and we could talk about them forever. All the consumers have very different needs and motivations, and furthermore, all the consumers are very different in terms of profiling. And I think a lot of what Rory said about our motivations and the ways we are just points to the fact that segmentation is becoming less of a blunt tool and more of a highly precise tool, but it will never be an exact and precise science. So finally, we're also aware that consumers are very different in terms of how they engage with brands. Some are advocates, and some literally go to a brand just because they have to. They don't really want to, they just have to. It's a bit of a distressed purchase. So our task is to interpret these motivations, intentions, and attitudes, and how they turn into consumer journeys. Then we want to provide relevant and resonant information to maximize the journey and to create the right marcoms. And this should drive the desired outcome for brands. With the advent of digital data, it is now possible for us to interpret this customer journey over a far, far longer period than we used to be able to see, because we have this, so we can see so much more of the activity before the actual purchase or transaction takes place, and also during the life of owning potentially a purchase. So it's very, very powerful in terms of the breadth and depth of it. We now also have visibility of what they're doing because of the granularity of this data that's around. And I can't say enough how I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of this being truly game-changing. So whilst, as I said, we know journeys are not linear, we can identify on journeys what consumers are doing at the various stages. So on this slide, I've got this stage intrigue, and that's really where consumers are thinking, am I interested? Should I look at this any further? What do I think about it? Then you kind of move into the blue stage, which is inform. And there it's very much more about researching and considering. And then we're into the area of green, which is making a decision. Finally, you hit the purple stage, which is where they're experiencing the product in life itself. And understanding these stages and interpreting the data wisely within context, and that's a nod to Rory's point, but it's also a message we push across a lot. Within context, what consumers are doing is absolutely critical. So we therefore see this disruption that's being brought by digital as a new dawn for the way we do marcoms. And it's the main reason that actually, after all these years, data is becoming a slightly hot subject, and it is reinvigorating marketing. So we have two key points of view, and I'm going to talk to you about both of them because they are relevant to the whole conversation. And the first one is about connected data, and the second one, which I'll come on to, is about the whole consumer. Firstly, on connected data, the consumer wants and expects a connected experiences. And in actual fact, all audiences assume that it's far easier than it actually is. We've all heard people moan about the fact at dinner parties of they didn't know I was doing this, and then I did that, and it just was a disjointed experience, and it's a massive source of angst. So for example, you know, I would go mad if my iPad didn't sync with my iPhone, with my laptop. We just take it for granted. Then you've got real-life examples of places, you know, like Charles Tyrwhitt, where you might have only bought online, but actually, if you go into the store and you don't know what size your husband's shirt was or what it looked like, you can ask and they'll tell you about previous purchases and make recommendations based on your transactional behaviour. And we've come to expect that as a way of life. So, to give consumers a connected experience, my point is you really need to have connected data. Traditionally, organisations built data warehouses for single customer view databases, marketing databases, and all the data was pulled together in one repository. There was issues of it being high capex, long lead times, complex data management, and often high costs to run, and inevitably, a key point here, some data latency. However, these databases remain a great source of knowledge and they drive many campaigns and a lot of CRM, and I'd never advocate not having a transactional data set. However, my point here would be that the time has come to create real synergy by supplementing this data. Our approach is to work with brands to create strategies which connect data. And this data needs to be much more real-time and agile than my comparative of the single customer view databases. Joining the often online data, as I said earlier, has been done in many places, not just by Charles Tyrwhitt, and it's definitely driving improved experiences. However, as I'm hopefully going to manage to demonstrate today, results and insights can be driven by connecting all types of data. And today, I'm going to focus more on how we connect research data, because that's a big focus for us. But other data to connect is clearly social, and also demand is massively growing for device-based data and location-based data. Now, just before I move on, clearly one of the technical challenges is the silos in which most organizations work, and the issue that we're connecting data, which has real volume, just incredible volume, and I'd use the word velocity. The speed at which it moves and changes and is up to date is really critical. There is also a second issue, which is that the data we're now dealing with is structured and unstructured. So for instance, an example would be connecting structured name and address data with relevant social commentary about the individual. It would be hell if you got them wrong, just a simple fact. To meet the consumer's expectations, organizations need to create a strategy to decide what they need to connect and collect to drive the insights and to drive the relevant communication. So I was trying to think of a good example, but a generic one, I guess, is that to drive a promotion to teenagers, a first name coupled with a deep knowledge of their likes and digital behavior would be vastly more important than a teenager's surname and their address, because their house and demographics are relatively irrelevant at this point. So especially in today's environment of big data, it is even more crucial that we decide and consider what is useful to us, or you'd be processing until the cows came home, quite frankly. So really important to work out what is not required. And through the process, you can then create more agile analytical environments which help us move towards responding in real time. And it's got to be in real time in line with the consumer behavior. It's hard to connect data well. It really is difficult, and clarity is key. Clarity is absolutely key. You really have to be clear about what you're collecting and why you're collecting it. So, on the second point of view, our second point of view is the whole consumer. And if we're going to put the consumer at the heart of the brand, and we're going to do that because we believe it will drive greater value to organizations, then we need to create the full picture of the consumer. We also have to appreciate that we're doing it because consumers are now much more in the driving seat than they ever were in the past. So, you will, of course, be aware of the need to interact with your own data. So I've got that here in your top left, I was about to say top right, in your top left quadrant. And that's taking all your rich information on their transactions and interactions and analysing and working with that. Frequently, clients have also augmented their data with lifestyle data, which is just below. And from that, they've created segmentation and lookalike models to target and communicate with a much wider audience. This has been and does remain a highly effective approach, and it remains so because it's easy to connect the name and address data. However, as I said earlier, the potential challenge is the latency of the data, and also that the source has been questionnaires open to some subjectivity. Moving into the digital world, we can access great volumes and velocity of data from social, top right, and from digital, which is a quadrant on the bottom that I'm going to go on and talk in more depth about. Whilst this data is much harder to connect to the consumer at an individual level, it is possible. Connecting through email addresses and mobile numbers is a very safe way, but we also connect cookie data to email addresses and to consumers, and don't worry, it's all de-identified, and privacy is a marvelous world in this environment, but it all happens. The point is it provides such a rich source of data in such great volume, but it's actually factual. It's based on real things that are happening, real attitudes and behaviours up to the minute. And this improves our understanding, and we're no longer in the zone of just targeting individuals based on name and address demographics. What's more is I think it actually gives some brands that never had the opportunity to connect with consumers because they had no access to name and address data, the opportunity to directly engage with consumers. And we're certainly seeing a lot more interest from consumer packaged good companies about building up relationships direct with consumers because they now can, because consumers are coming direct to them. Critically, this means that our collective ability to generate messages and communicate in a more precision manner is greatly enhanced. And then we've got a finer ability to target consumers in all their diverse types, and in time create messaging and imagery which appeals to these new segments. Now I see this as a bit of sort of left side and right side of brain coming together, where creativity no longer works totally separate to data and probably behavioral economics. Whilst it's still really early days, this gives us a massive opportunity to expand our knowledge and really create ongoing dialogues, with consumers moving away from campaign-driven approach, and lots of our clients are still in the zone of very campaign-driven approach, to consumers being always on. You know, I as a consumer never switch off. I'm, you know, using my iPhone or my BlackBerry, everything all the time, 24/7, and we all are. And this is a big trend that we're seeing happening, and marketeers are following it, but it is taking an evolution rather than a complete revolution. And it's created a massive opportunity for us to extend our ability to target and then reach and scale our communications. Don't forget, in the digital world, there's no passport boundaries in the same way as there are in the real world. So, our focus today, as I said, will be on the digital element. And I'm going to use this slide to try and talk you through what's quite a complex process, but hopefully it will resonate with most of you. We call this our decision track platform. And in order to drive value from the digital data that's in Compete, we have created this immensely powerful platform that's capable of analysing the Compete data and taking us all the way through to consumers. So the key headlines of our approach for Decision Track are: number one, understand the audience; two, find a larger audience of universe to communicate to; and three, try to shorten the journey to conversion. So I'm just going to move on now to the second curve, where you can see there's a Compete logo and there's decision track wording there. The Complete panel in the UK consists of some 300,000 individuals. Now in the US it's far larger, and we've been working with Kantar and Compete in the US to do a lot of activity, and it's been enormously successful. Now here we have 300 UK individuals whose total online behaviour is monitored from the overall domain level right down to detailed page level. And from my understanding and knowledge, that's quite useful and powerful. The platform allows us to gain much deeper insights from the data, identifying the multiple types of groups all taking different journeys with your brand. This is possible because the data comes from a longitudinal panel with the ability to create cohorts for sophisticated analysis. Now, as a non-analytics person, I think that's quite clever of me to know that, you know, joking aside. No, it's really very analytically clever is what I understand. Furthermore, we've had to create some algorithms to simplify and expedite the analysis of this data, or we'd be there till Christmas. It's really big data, and we've got to make it happen in the most effective and efficient manner. So once we've understood and analysed the journeys and driven insights for them, we can move into the next phase, which is finding a larger universe. So to do this, you go into modelling, and then you go into targeting based on the models. So I'm now going to just briefly talk to our third curve here, which is called eye behaviour. So to do this, we take the de-identified data enhance it, match it to a whole consumer view, and then take this model and through some data assets which match the profile of the various groups, we go out and we basically target a much, much wider universe of people. This way, we can guide the marketing strategy to be more relevant and resonant to the various segments. So I'll just give you a quick example, which is we were doing some work for a weight loss snack from Kraft. It's actually a US example, but they were really interested to understand the online behavior in order to target the advertising. So we worked from the decision point, which was when the consumer first connects with the weight loss content. Now, you know, it's a weight loss product. It's a little snack, under 100 calories. You know, we all get shiny eyes on those ones. So our expectation was to see high usage of health, fitness sites, and definitely some dieting sites. However, in reality, within the first 30 days, consumers more than doubled their engagement with social networking and gaming sites. So the advertising was therefore directed to these sites, and awareness and sales grew. And the insight was that consumers frequent the social sites more to say, oh, you know, you can imagine it, can't you? I can't stand this bloody dieting. If it goes on much longer, I'll go nuts, or I found this great bar. So there's a lot of that going on social sites. And also, they went to a lot of gossip sites, you know, all the celeb news. I'm sure they're looking at all these women that look, you know, super thin and wonderful, thinking, well, if I keep looking at that, I'll keep going. That'll be my motivation. And it really moved everyone away from the task at hand, which was losing weight. The other one that came up that quite surprised us was gaming sites, which the client said, you know, would never have thought they were doing anything on gaming sites. You could see the logic in some of the earlier ones, but not the gaming sites so much. So this totally changed the strategic direction for the client and really worked. So the sorts of questions we're getting, now I don't expect you to read them all, so I'm just going to sort of clump these together because if you're at the back of the room and this grey is not particularly powerful to read, it might be quite hard. So the typical questions we're being asked, quite a few, if I'm honest, are about the competition. What do online consumer engagement dynamics look like in our industry? How do we compare against the competition? And what is the competition doing particularly well? I think it's just worth making the point that with compete data, you can look at your own consumer journeys, but you can also look at your competitors. And that is not a bad thing to do for some of you, I'm sure. So the next set of questions that I'm going to put together are mainly questions about site performance. These tend to be things like, you know, overall how the messages are delivered, overall questions about are we getting it right, are we hitting the right need. And so what we see as well is that we've clearly moved into a phase of digital optimization, and it's just digital optimization based on informed decisions. So the questions there are, you know, what particular areas of our site are most and least valuable, how can we improve the online experience, and what are my customers searching for, and how are they searching? So to help us guide this, there's really three elements to it. There's the element of the sites, the pages, and the content, and then we mix this with an overlay of what is working for the different profiles of consumers, and then there's also a third level of overlay, which is what's happening at the particular stages in the journey. So finally, there's questions like, where can we find our target market segment online? So to explain this, I'll just give you a Volkswagen example. And Volkswagen were using digital data to identify and define target audiences based on their online behavior. From the analysis, a new segment called hipsters was found. And this segment was targeted online to launch a new vehicle. It was part of a very complex digital campaign, but it became the top performing segment, and the hipsters segment then went out to roll out. So I'm now going to move into a case study, but I thought it might help if we had some of that context first. And the case study is about a utility provider, and the objective for this utility provider is to try and understand how to increase conversion online for a utility provider. So for them, in this case, conversion is evident and measurable from the quantity of consumers actively going to get an online quote. So that's the thing to remember. And everyone makes decisions at very different points. I may have got a utility quote yesterday, and if I look at everyone in the room, we may have all got quotes ranging from many months ago to yesterday, or even this morning. So with the data, the challenge is to try and create order from this chaos and then understand the journeys. And to do this, we have to align everyone against a decision point. So we took all the data and all the consumers in the compete panel who had a utility quote and aligned the data. We can then look backwards and we can look forwards at the behavior only any time frame in which the data exists. So that might be 6 months, it might be 3 months, it might be 3 days. It's really up to the client. You can look at the data any time, going backwards and going forwards. Then we crunch this large volume of big data to give us insight and direction and create the segments. Yep. Okay. So what we do to create the segments is we start with the universe of everybody who's visited the client's site to get a quote. And we analyze all the journeys against this desired decision point. We can then see against the total universe that visited the client's site, we can then see the 5 different groups as a proportion of the total universe. So that's where I'm starting down on the left. That's the groups, adds up to 100%, and the decision point's on the far right, and the journey they take is the bit in the middle. So in this case, we broke it down to 5 segments based on their online behavior. The first is those who just come and look at the brand, eventually resulting in 12% getting an online quote. Then there's a segment called researchers who start very well, they grow in interest, and they end well with 30% getting a quote. Then you've got another segment called third-party hunters, who not surprisingly start quite low on engagement, but in the end, 17% of them go on to convert. And this group is good and it's interesting, but obviously from the client's perspective, because they've gone through third-party comparison sites, the client will experience a lower margin. Then we have quoters, which was a group of the equivalent size of the researchers, but 41% of them went on to convert. So for the next few slides, I'm now going to drill down and just focus on the behavior as quoters as a segment. So, as I said, decision point. The decision point is just there with a 0 in it. And what you can see is that when we start on decision point, and this is for energy, but you can do this with anybody's data, and I just say imagine it for your own if you want to. Of the 41% who converted to get a quote, on day 0, no big surprises, they were super active on energy sites and comparison sites. It should build? Yeah. And for this particular example here, I'm going back 28 days and I'm going back 14 days and just showing the data at the 28-day mark and at the 14-day mark, and then I'm going 14 days forward. So, and as I said earlier, any time frame. So I keep plugging that point, but it's really key. So looking back 28 days prior to when they actually made this decision to get a quote, you can see that they're looking at reference sites and shopping and review sites. Closer to the decision point, they were more likely to visit travel, technology, and blogging sites. The insight was that on some of the blogging sites, people were actually seeking reassurance and information about, do you really think this is better or don't you? Then you move to after the decision point. Now, after the decision point, the quoters were more likely to visit news, reference, home and lifestyle and entertainment sites, very much suggesting that they were getting back on with their life, or potentially that they were moving house or considering moving house, which of course, if you're an energy provider, is a really interesting fact. So for that particular thing, we drill into it in much more detail. So on that point of drilling it into much more detail, although this is macro level information, we are able to get a very micro level understanding of page interaction and what they're looking at. So as an example of micro level detail, here's the YouTube data they look at. You can really understand their viewing habits. The majority of them were music related. However, in the center on the top there, you can see a site which was a money saving type, Virgin Money one actually, targeted at mothers, then one related to pets, recipes and DIY. Overall, the detail led us to the point that the insights that quoters were an audience who were into shopping around, saving money and being somewhat cautious. So critically, we can also tell which sites they're not likely to visit. And they were the luxury sites and investment. They were really high on the list, super high. Now with data, it's often as important to consider the exclusions as the inclusions. And also I'd say at this point, don't forget all this information that one's gleaning from the online behavior based on the consumer's profile could be taken back and put into a traditional single customer view database and just augment that data in that point. It might well change the segment slightly. So then we move on to demographics. With the compete data, we have the ability to understand and analyze the demographic profile of that segment as compared to the other segments, and that segment taking that specific journey. So going back to our two key points of view, this gives us a very rich place to start where the information gathered guides us in our overall data strategy. And it does help us. It genuinely helps us improve the planning and the marketing comms strategy, which, while it will never be a perfect science, at least gives us a way of making messages much more relevant and resonant to individuals. The next step in this process, if we really wanted to go deeper, would be to further develop our knowledge of the whole consumer by appending lots more incremental data, or to take in client data or much more social data and enhance the messaging. So, even without enhancing the data any further, this is the final stage of decision track. We have this fantastic insight, and for our utility example, we have an absolute need to drive acquisition. It's a relentless pursuit for them. So based on the predictive and lookalike models, we can complete the final stage, which is to find a larger universe to convert to quoting. This can be achieved by extending the reach and scale of the segments which we deem to be the most high performing. And then through using our proprietary data assets called iBehavior, and actually we've got a whole WPP direct data management platform where we have lots of other data in there, like the supermarket shopping data. We can access millions of addressable consumers, and we have real-time knowledge of their billions of transactions. And so through that, we can build out reach and scale through the channels. So our final objective overall was to shorten the journey. Once we've identified this group and found a wider universe, we then seek to address them at the most appropriate time and in the most appropriate manner, which shortens the journey, hopefully improving the effectiveness and the conversion. So for example, on this, encouraging a semi-active decision maker, which is somebody up there at the end of yellow, to go straight through to the decision point rather than us waste time and effort on communicating them in the middle would be a great outcome. Or to take somebody at the very end of their life stage, where they're a proactive reviewer, to convert there and then rather than start the whole journey again. That's the sort of shortening of the journey we're looking for at this stage. So outcomes, it's always the hard bit, isn't it? How many client case studies are we allowed to publicly talk about in great depth? It's difficult. So what I thought I'd share with you are just some of the outcomes. So for the utility case study, our insights led us to identify that actually store pop-ups and in which locations might be a good source of acquisition. We were also considering testing inserts and packaging based on the insight we gleaned from the sorts of shopping sites they're going to, and the targeting of home movers and how we might target those home movers and drill into them in much more detail. For Land Rover, we found that over 4 months, 60% of the audience took 5 distinct journeys, and the 40%, can you believe it, took an amazing 300 types of journeys. And this led us to recommend a simplification of the touch points that consumers were directed to. And actually, when we looked at the detail, we were directing them all around the place, and some people were, quite frankly, going round in circles. We also identified that over half of luxury car brands start with auto-review sites, but just before they get to this decision point, 85% of them visit competitor websites, leading us to advise that sustaining communication throughout and targeting earlier than previously thought would be a good way to increase effectiveness. For a chocolate brand, we achieved awareness of 75%, which was a 20% uplift based on optimizing, and for the same company, a 13% increase in sales. One of the ways this was achieved was by sending an email with a video clip in it of the TV ad to people that we knew would be actively engaged at the right moment in the journey, and that went so viral, it eradicated the need for TV advertising. So it was really, really powerful. So, as conclusion, my view is that digital disruption is very good for us, and it's very good for our consumers. It's exciting and interesting as data becomes much more powerful and a key driver of informed and relevant marketing communications. It's a time of great change and progress, with lots of learning taking place, and we're doing lots of learning with our clients, and it's a fantastic environment in which to test and learn. It will also drive much more collaboration between creative and data as we move forward. And if done correctly, it will give us enormous competitive advantage and effectiveness, and my hope is a truly, genuinely rewarding consumer experience. Thank you very much for listening.